Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's medium-term budget policy statement tackled various issues, including government taking over a portion of struggling utility Eskom's debt. For more reaction then to the mid-term budget, we can speak now to Economist at Momentum Investment, Sanisha Packirisamy. Sanisha, very good afternoon to you. Grateful for your time. We'll get to the specifics in a moment, but firstly, by your reading, was this a good medium-term budget?
Thank you so much for having me on your show. I think that markets actually welcomed the information that came through on the budget yesterday. We saw that fixed income markets rallied, and we also saw a positive movement in the local currency. And I think this was really on the back of government continuing to push the line of building fiscal buffers in the medium term and still applying a more prudent approach to fiscal expenditure. And I think this is what the markets really liked about the budget yesterday.
But there is an expectation, of course, that in the next few years, from now until about 2025, 2026, we're going to see spending that's going to have to increase. Give us an idea of how that will have to be managed going forward and how we, the public, are likely to see it in action.
Well, the way we view the budget is that in the near term, the fiscal consolidation numbers look quite solid and should appease rating agencies and financial markets. However, as you mentioned, in the medium term, there are a number of risks that are probably going to come through and be realized in the February budget and further budgets from there on. The first is really around a more longer-term viable solution for the funding problem of Eskom. And even though they did allude to the fact that they would potentially be taking up between a third and two-thirds of Eskom's balance sheet onto their own, we don't really have a lot of finer detail around how that's going to be done and how much that's going to add to government's debt to GDP ratio and how much that's going to add to the interest burden. Secondly, we didn't get a lot of information around the public sector wage bill, and we know that what came out in terms of what they've penciled in for the next couple of years has not really appealed to the civil servants. And then the third factor is that we don't have a longer-term solution to a more permanent funding for the social grant recipients that have received the social relief of distress grant in the last couple of months. And as a result of those three factors, we do believe that there are going to be massive expenditure pressures in the medium to longer run.
Just on Eskom, government is not committed to an exact number as far as what it's going to contribute to that 400 billion rand debt, right? But it'll pay a portion. We know that so far, but it comes with shall we say, a caveat, where what's going to be paid will be basically based to a degree on what NERSA is going to do when it grants Eskom a tariff increase. Do you think that's the best method, shall we say, of calculating how much government should pay?
I think the way we should look at this is to say that the funding that they do give to Eskom is going to be conditional. Conditional on Eskom turning around their story, ensuring that they do have a successful unbundling process, that then we have generation, distribution and transmission as three separate business entities. That is going to be quite a positive for the market, given that they will then be able to invest in the entities that they believe will be successful on a longer term basis. It will also be largely contingent on Eskom trying to increase the capacity that they have in order to ensure that we have more reliable energy supply. And from those perspectives, I think that's going to be quite positive for markets.
And on the issue of e-tolls, I mean, many people in Gauteng have been wanting this sort of announcement from government. Now the minister says that what's going to be happening is that there's going to be a 70-30 split between national and provincial government. Does that make financial sense given all the other pressures on government at all levels?
Well, the user pay principle is probably not going to end with e-tolls. We now know that going forward, they're also likely to set up a water board, which will be like the NERSA in the water space. And on the back of that, we may actually see tariffs being applied and additional tariffs being applied in the water industry. So on the back of the e-tolls debacle, this is not the end of the user pay principle in South Africa, and I think we are likely to see more in the coming years.
We touched on a few things. I mean, one of them being what government is going to give to Eskom as far as an allocation for debt. But another issue that has been kicked further down the road, shall we say, is around a basic income grant, whether we'll get a permanent one or not, and if so, how much. What is the feeling of the market, shall we say, around that aspect and the fact that as things stand, it's unresolved?
Markets are quite nervous around this aspect of the budget. It was extended for another 12-month period, I think, to buy government some time to deliberate further on how to tackle the issue of extending the social relief of distress grant on a more permanent basis. There are a couple of factors that government has to consider, such as who is eligible for this grant, and the second is in terms of where the funding is going to come from. Now, government has drawn quite a hard line to say that the additional funding for a more permanent solution to an extension in the social grants has to either come from a reprioritization of budget funds that already exist, or it has to come through from an additional new revenue stream. Now, on the reprioritization side of things, there was a great chapter in the budget that showed us that service delivery is already starting to wane, given that the number of police officers per population group and the same thing with educators and nurses is starting to dwindle. And so reprioritization within existing budgets is becoming more and more difficult without compromising service delivery. The other option, which is an additional revenue stream, is equally as difficult, given that the tax burden in South Africa is already significantly high.
And there was a surprise yesterday when the minister confirmed that, revenue collection had exceeded expectations, and now that'll allow more spending, for instance, on infrastructure, healthcare, safety, and security. But can that be maintained in the long term in terms of what is raised through tax collection?
Well, this is another positive aspect of the budget because government has realized that the commodity price windfall is just temporary in nature. And they've suggested that the commodity prices that are favorable currently may actually fade within the next 2 years. And as a result, the budget figures do not heavily rely on a continuation of very robust commodity prices. And I think this is something that financial markets also took to heart.
Sanisha Packirisamy, Economist with Momentum Investments. Thank you for your time.